David Torres had exactly 17 minutes before his shift ended when the observation deck door sealed behind him, with the kind of finality that suggested the universe had a sense of humor. He'd come up here to recalibrate the atmospheric sensors, a job that sounded important but mostly involved waving a handheld scanner at wall panels and waiting for it to beep approvingly. The Kepler's promise hummed around him, that constant thrum of fusion engines and life support systems that every spacer learned to sleep through, and he was looking forward to his bunk, a meal pack that promised authentic Chicago-style pizza, but would inevitably taste like cardboard with tomato-flavored regret, and maybe an hour of that detective show everyone kept talking about. Then he'd pressed the wrong button. The door had clicked, and when he turned around to leave, the panel flashed red with text that made his stomach drop. Lockdown protocol active, diplomatic security measure, duration, 47 minutes. "You've got to be kidding me," he muttered, slapping the panel as if physical violence had ever solved a computer problem. It hadn't worked in the 20th century, and it didn't work now in 2247. The panel just blinked at him with digital indifference. Through the observation deck's transparent aluminum walls, David could see down into the main reception hall 3 levels below. That's when he remembered. The Erythian delegation. The first formal contact between humanity and a species that had appeared at the edge of Sol system 6 months ago in ships that looked like they'd been grown rather than built. All organic curves and bioluminescent panels. Earth's government had nearly imploded trying to decide whether to send warships or welcome committees. They'd settled on both, which was very on brand for humanity. The reception hall glittered with formal uniforms and evening wear. Ambassador Wei stood at the center, her silver dress reflecting the overhead lights as she gestured expansively. Beside her, the Erythian delegation stood in a semicircle, and even from up here, David could see how they commanded attention. They wore garments that seemed to shift colors subtly, adapting to the light, and their movements had a precision that suggested either extensive diplomatic training or a completely different skeletal structure. Possibly both. But it was their queen who drew his eye. Queen Celestria. He'd seen her on the shipwide broadcasts, of course, during the initial greeting ceremonies. The woman, and she was undeniably woman-shaped, which had caused considerable excitement among the xenobiologists, stood with her hands clasped in front of her, her head tilted slightly as Ambassador Wei explained something about human cultural appreciation through the sharing of fermented beverages. Her hair was dark and long, woven with what looked like living lights that pulsed gently. Her features were sharp and elegant. Her bearing spoke of someone who'd been trained since birth to carry the weight of civilizations. And her ears, those distinctive Erythian ears, rose from the sides of her head in long, graceful points that curved slightly backward, so expressive that he could read her mood even from this distance. Right now, they angled forward with what he was learning to recognize as polite interest, though he suspected she was internally dying of boredom. David sighed and settled against the railing. 45 minutes left. He watched as Ambassador Wei introduced the Erythian delegation to Commander Okonkwo, who immediately launched into what was probably a detailed explanation of the ship's defensive capabilities, because the man couldn't help himself. Queen Celestria's ears twitched, the Erythian equivalent of a suppressed eye roll, according to the cultural briefings he'd skimmed. Then something shifted in the dynamics below. One of the human attachés, a nervous-looking young man whose name David couldn't remember, offered Queen Celestria a glass of champagne. She accepted it with a nod, but when she raised it in the toast that followed, her hand moved in a graceful arc that the humans mirrored awkwardly. The attaché tried to copy her gesture exactly, overbalanced, and sent his glass tumbling. It shattered spectacularly on the polished floor. The room froze. David could see the horror on every human face. First contact protocols probably had 17 subsections about not creating interstellar incidents through clumsiness. But Queen Celestria laughed. Not a polite diplomatic titter, a genuine, bright laugh that seemed to surprise even her own delegation. She said something in her melodic language, then switched to accented but clear English. On my world, we say that broken glass at a celebration means good fortune is being released into the room. Perhaps our peoples have more in common than we thought. The tension shattered along with the glass. Humans laughed, relieved. The Erythian delegation's ears relaxed into positions that suggested amusement. Ambassador Wei smoothly directed staff to clean up while pulling the conversation forward. Crisis averted by quick thinking and genuine warmth. David found himself grinning. Now that's someone who'd make a good wife, he said to his reflection in the transparent wall. Smart, diplomatic, and she's got a sense of humor about all this bureaucratic nonsense. The universe could use more people like. He stopped, listened, heard his own voice echoing back at him with crystal clarity. His eyes dropped to the intercom panel beside the railing. The little green light that should have been off was glowing cheerfully. The panel helpfully displayed. Broadcast to main reception hall. Active. Oh no, oh no, 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 no. 3 levels below, hundreds of faces turned upward in perfect synchronization. Humans and Erythians alike stared at the observation deck. At him. Ambassador Wei's expression cycled through confusion, horror, and furious calculation in about 2 seconds. Commander Okonkwo looked like he was trying to decide whether to laugh or activate emergency protocols. And Queen Celestria. She stood perfectly still, her luminous eyes finding him through the transparent barriers. Her ears rotated fully upward, an expression he didn't know how to read. Then, slowly, deliberately, her lips curved into a smile that somehow managed to be both amused and absolutely terrifying in its intensity. She said something quiet to her nearest advisor, never breaking eye contact with David. The advisor's ears shot straight up in shock. The Queen's smile widened. David's communicator buzzed with incoming priority messages. 47 of them, in the last 10 seconds. I'm going to die, he whispered to the uncaring stars beyond the hull. I'm going to die in space, and they're going to jettison my body without honors, and somehow I'll deserve it. Below, Queen Celestria raised her glass toward the observation deck in a gesture that was unmistakably a salute, or possibly a declaration of war. David couldn't tell which would be worse. The door behind him finally clicked open. Freedom, escape, the blessed possibility of finding an airlock and jumping out of it before anyone could stop him. But Captain Rodriguez stood in the doorway, her expression carefully neutral in the way that meant someone was about to have a very bad day. Tours, she said quietly, we need to talk now. Captain Rodriguez's office smelled like coffee that had been reheated 3 times, and the particular brand of stress that came from managing first contact protocols. David sat in the chair across from her desk, flanked by Ambassador Wei, and a woman he'd never seen before who wore the insignia of Earth's Diplomatic Intelligence Corps. That last detail made his palms sweat. Let me make sure I understand this correctly, Ambassador Wei said, her voice carrying the dangerous calm of someone mentally composing a very angry report. You told an alien queen, in front of 200 witnesses from both our species, that she would make a good wife. I didn't tell her, David protested weakly. I told myself. The intercom just happened to be broadcasting to the entire reception hall, the DIC officer finished. Her nameplate read Collins. She consulted her tablet with the air of someone reading a particularly fascinating autopsy report. The Erythian delegation's linguist team has analyzed your statement 17 times. They've confirmed the sincerity markers in your vocal patterns. Apparently, humans are terrible liars on a biological level. Your heart rate increased, your breathing shifted to what they call truth-speak patterns, and you exhibited what their cultural database identifies as genuine admiration. That's just fantastic, David muttered. Aliens have better lie detectors than we do. They've been studying us for 3 years before making contact, Collins continued. They've watched every broadcast we've sent into space, thousands of hours of human media. Apparently, Queen Celestria has personally viewed 73 romantic comedies, 42 dramas about human courtship, and the complete works of Jane Austen. David blinked. She what? Captain Rodriguez leaned forward, her fingers steepled. The Erythians are thorough tours. They didn't just show up at our doorstep. They did their homework. And according to their cultural framework, what you did down there. She paused, seeming to search for words. It's significant. Significant how? Like, starting a war significant or just regular humiliating significant? Ambassador Wei pulled up a holographic display that showed Erythian script flowing across the air. In their culture, public declarations of admiration witnessed by community members carry substantial weight. It's not quite a marriage proposal by their standards, but it's in the same category. Think of it as a formal statement of interest that requires a response. A response. David felt his stomach drop into his boots. What kind of response? Queen Celestria has requested a private audience with you, Collins said. Specifically with you. She turned down our offers to have trained diplomats present. She wants the man who spoke those words. The room fell silent except for the hum of the ship, and David's increasingly panicked breathing. Captain Rodriguez took a long drink of her terrible coffee and made a face that suggested she was regretting every decision that had led to this moment. This is insane, David said. I fix atmosphere recyclers. I calibrate sensors. Yesterday, my biggest concern was whether the algae tanks in hydroponics were getting enough UV exposure. I'm not qualified to have a private audience with an alien queen. And yet, Ambassador Wei said with the air of someone delivering particularly ironic bad news, you're the only one she wants to see. The Erythian Council sent formal communication an hour ago. They view this as what they call a moment of authentic cultural intersection. Their exact words were that they've been searching for species capable of seeing beyond titles and positions, and your accidental broadcast demonstrated exactly that quality. I was talking to myself. Yes, which their psychologists find fascinating. Apparently, Erythian culture doesn't really have an equivalent. They're communal telepaths at close range. The concept of private thoughts spoken aloud when one believes they're alone is something they find both alien and incredibly endearing. Collins pulled up another display showing what looked like Erythian social media, if such a thing existed. David couldn't read the script, but the images were clear enough. His face, captured from the observation deck cameras. The Queen's smile. Thousands upon thousands of responses that the translation software was labeling as positive and romantically optimistic, and more worryingly, invested in outcome. Oh no, David said. Please tell me this isn't what I think it is. If you think it's gone viral across 2 civilizations, and you're now the subject of intense speculation about human-Erythian relations, then yes, it's exactly what you think it is. Collins actually smiled, the first expression she'd shown beyond professional neutrality. Congratulations, Tours. You're famous across 2 star systems. I want to die. Later, Captain Rodriguez said. First, you're going to meet Queen Celestria. We've arranged for a neutral meeting room. No cameras, no recording devices beyond the standard security protocols. Just you, her, and a translator AI in case there are linguistic complications. What am I supposed to say to her? Sorry, I accidentally proposed marriage via intercom, my bad. Ambassador Wei's expression softened slightly. Actually, Tours, you might be the right person for this precisely because you're not a diplomat. The Queen's cultural advisor sent us a brief. Do you know what they value most in interpersonal communication? Not making an idiot of yourself. Authenticity, directness. The Erythian people have apparently struggled with what they call the weight of performance in their society. Everything is ritual and protocol. When you spoke those words, you weren't performing for anyone. You were just being honest. That's what caught her attention. David looked at each of them in turn, searching for some sign this was an elaborate prank. But Captain Rodriguez's exhausted sincerity, Ambassador Way's calculating hope, and Collins's barely suppressed amusement all told him this was desperately, terrifyingly real. "When?" he asked finally. 20 minutes, the captain said. "We've prepared a briefing packet on Erithian customs, body language, and appropriate topics of conversation. 20 minutes, that's not enough time to. It's more than enough time to shower, change into a clean uniform, and remember that you're representing the best of humanity." Captain Rodriguez stood, signaling the meeting's end. "Tors, I know this is overwhelming, but you saw something genuine in Queen Celestria when you made that comment. She responded to that genuineness. Just be yourself. That's what she wants to meet." David stood on shaking legs. Collins handed him a data chip with the briefing materials. As he reached the door, Ambassador Way called out, "Tors, for what it's worth, your instinct was right. She does have a remarkable sense of humor. Try to remember that when you're in there. She's nervous too. Alien queens get nervous. Everyone gets nervous when someone sees them," Way said quietly. "Really sees them. That's universal, I think." 18 minutes later, David stood outside meeting room 7 wearing a uniform that still smelled like the ship's recycling system, and clutching the briefing chip he hadn't had time to review. The door opened with a soft hiss. Queen Celestria stood by the window, looking out at the stars. When she turned, her ears angled forward with unmistakable curiosity. "David Tors," she said, his name carrying a musical quality in her accent. "The man who thinks I would make a good wife." David's brain had apparently decided that complete shutdown was the appropriate response to having an alien queen address him directly. His mouth opened. Nothing came out. He tried again with similar results. Celestria's ears tilted slightly, an expression he was beginning to recognize as amusement. "Your bio-readings suggest acute stress. Should I request medical assistance?" "You can read my bio-readings. The room's standard sensors. They display on the wall panel there." She gestured gracefully toward a screen he hadn't noticed. Sure enough, his heart rate was prominently featured, spiking like a seismograph during an earthquake. "I apologize if that feels invasive. I can disable the display." "No, it's fine, great. Love having my panic quantified in real time." David forced himself to breathe. "Your Majesty, I need to apologize for." "Please don't." She moved away from the window, and he noticed she'd chosen to wear something less formal than the reception gown. The garment still shimmered with that color-shifting quality, but it looked more practical, almost casual by royal standards. "I've endured 47 apologies today. 47 different humans expressing regret for your honest words. It's been exhausting." "Oh well, I still probably should." "Do you actually believe I would make a good wife, David Tors? Or was it merely a passing observation, with no genuine thought behind it?" The directness of the question stopped him cold. Her ears had rotated fully forward now, focused on him with an intensity that suggested his answer mattered more than diplomatic niceties. "I believed it," he said finally. "Watching you handle that broken glass situation, turning what could have been an incident into a moment of connection, that took real emotional intelligence. And yeah, I thought whoever ends up with someone like that would be lucky." Her ears relaxed slightly, their tips curving back in what the briefing materials had labeled as pleased satisfaction. "Your heart rate stabilized when you said that. Truth speaking again. Your people really do have us figured out, don't they? We tried. 3 years of studying your broadcasts, attempting to understand what drives humanity. Do you know what we found most puzzling?" She moved to the room's small table and sat, gesturing for him to join her. "Your capacity for hope in the face of overwhelming evidence that the universe doesn't care about you. You're alone in your solar system, barely beginning to reach beyond it, statistically insignificant in the cosmos. And yet you make art, tell jokes, fall in love. We found it fascinating, terrifying, beautiful." David sat across from her, the table a neutral space between their worlds. That's a pretty poetic way of saying we're cosmically irrelevant but too stubborn to accept it. She laughed, that same genuine sound from the reception. Yes, exactly that. My people achieved interstellar travel 2,000 years ago. We've met 47 other species. Most are either aggressively expanding or passively declining. But humans, you're still figuring out faster-than-light travel, and you've already sent art into space. Music, mathematics, a gold record with greetings in 55 languages attached to a primitive probe, hoping someone would find it and know you existed. Voyager, yeah, we're sentimental like that. It's not sentiment, it's defiance. Her ears angled forward again, intense. Every species we've encountered has lost that by the time they reached the stars. They became efficient, practical. But humanity is still young enough to believe the universe might listen if you shout loud enough. Is that why you're here? You wanted to meet the loud neighbors. We came because our council believes humanity might be compatible with us in ways other species haven't been. The Erythian people are old David Tours, ancient by your standards. We've forgotten how to hope for things beyond survival and efficiency. When we monitored your broadcasts and saw your romantic comedies, your novels, your music about love and loss and trying again despite everything, our cultural psychologists suggested perhaps we could learn to remember. David leaned back, processing. So this whole first contact thing is basically your civilization's midlife crisis. Celestria's ears shot straight up. Then she laughed so hard she had to cover her mouth with one hand. That is the most irreverent way anyone has ever characterized our mission, and I cannot argue with it. Yes, we're having a species-wide existential crisis, and humanity looked like interesting therapy. And I accidentally proposed during your therapy session. You said I would make a good wife. You didn't specify for whom. Her eyes met his, and there was something calculating behind the humor now. The human media we studied suggests that statement typically implies personal interest. Was that your intent? I was talking to myself in what I thought was a private moment. I wasn't hitting on you. I mean, not that you're not. He stopped, watching his heart rate spike again on the monitor. I'm making this worse. No, you're being authentic. That's what I asked to meet. She leaned forward slightly. David Tours, I need you to understand something. I am 247 years old by your calendar. I have ruled my people for 98 of those years. Every conversation I have is scripted. Every smile is calculated. Every word is analyzed by advisors before I speak it. When you said those words yesterday, do you know what I felt? Probably insulted. Hope, her voice dropped softer. For just a moment, someone looked at me and saw a person rather than a crown. Not Queen Celestria of the Erythian Unity, just someone who handled an awkward situation with grace and humor. When was the last time someone saw you, David Tours, really saw you past your job and your function? The question hit harder than he expected. He thought about the Kepler's Promise asterisk, the thousands of crew members, the way he'd become part of the machinery. Wake up, fix things, sleep, repeat. When had anyone last asked him what he wanted beyond his shift schedule? Yeah, he said quietly. I get that, being invisible most of the time. Until you're not. Until you say something that broadcasts to two civilizations, and suddenly everyone is watching. Her ears tilted sympathetically. I'm told your life has become complicated because of my council's reaction. They think this is some kind of significant cultural moment. Ambassador Wei used the word intersection. They're not wrong, but they're also not seeing the human in front of me who simply spoke his mind. She stood, moving to the window again. I came to this meeting to see if you were real, if that moment was genuine, or if I'd projected meaning onto random words because I wanted so badly to believe someone could see me. David stood too, keeping the table between them but feeling the weight of her words. I'm real. The words were real. The intercom accident was also very real, and I'm still trying to figure out if I should be mortified or if it somehow worked out. Both can be true. She turned back to him, and her expression carried something he recognized from his own mirror: loneliness wearing a crown. The council wants to pursue what they're calling cultural exchange protocols. They see our encounter as a template for human-Earthian relations: personal, authentic, direct. That sounds like they want to turn an embarrassing accident into policy. They want to turn it into hope. They've watched me fulfill duty for nearly a century. They've never seen me laugh like I did at that reception, like I just did with you. Her ears drooped slightly. I'm tired, David Tors, tired of performing. And terrified that if I stop, there's nothing underneath but someone who doesn't know how to be anything except a queen. So show me, he heard himself say. Not the queen stuff, just you. I've got clearance to the hydroponics bay. Nobody's there during gamma shift. It's just plants and grow lights and dirt. Most unroyal place on the ship. Her ears perked up with something like surprised delight. You're inviting me to play in dirt. I'm inviting you to see what normal looks like. No councils, no cameras, just two people who are tired of being symbols. You in? Celestria looked at him for a long moment, and then she smiled like someone who'd just decided to do something wonderfully inadvisable. I'll need to inform my guards. Tell them we're conducting vital cultural exchange in agricultural spaces. Is that what we're calling it? Unless you've got a better diplomatic euphemism for, let's go do something normal and see what happens. She walked toward the door, then paused, glancing back. David Tors, I think this is either the beginning of something unprecedented, or we're both about to get in tremendous trouble. Why not both? Her laugh echoed down the corridor as they left, and somewhere in the ship's security center, alarms were probably starting to go off. The hydroponics bay smelled like earth and growth, that ancient scent of things living and thriving in defiance of the vacuum outside. David had convinced Celestria's guards to wait outside by promising this was officially sanctioned cultural exchange, which was technically true if you squinted at the definition of officially sanctioned. The door sealed behind them with a hiss, leaving them surrounded by rows of tomatoes, lettuce, and experimental wheat strains under full-spectrum grow lights. Celestria stood at the entrance, her ears rotating slowly as she took in the space. This is extraordinary. You're growing food in accelerated cycles using atmospheric manipulation and artificial sunlight. We call it farming, but yeah, that's the technical version. David grabbed 2 stools and a crate of seedlings that needed transplanting. Your people don't do this. We do, but differently. Erythian agriculture is biointegrated. We grow our ships, our homes, our tools. Everything is alive in a symbiotic relationship with us. She moved closer to a tomato plant, her fingers hovering near the leaves without quite touching. These plants don't know you exist. They simply grow because conditions allow it. That seems inefficient. It's also freeing. They don't need me. They just need water, light, and nutrients. I like that. He set the seedlings on a work table and grabbed 2 pairs of gloves, offering her one. Ever gotten your hands dirty? She looked at the gloves like he'd offered her a live grenade. I have presided over agricultural festivals. I have blessed harvest ceremonies. I have never personally engaged in the physical act of cultivation. First time for everything. Come on, it's therapeutic. He pulled on his own gloves and demonstrated, gently removing a seedling from its starter tray and nestling it into prepared soil. See, basic transplanting. We're helping these guys get ready for the colony gardens on Mars Station 3. Celestria pulled on the gloves with careful precision, then mimicked his movements. Her first attempt crushed the seedling stem. She froze, her ears flattening backward in what he was learning meant distress. It's okay, happens all the time. These things are tougher than they look. Try the next one, lighter touch. She did, and this time the seedling survived the transfer. Her ears perked up triumphantly. I successfully relocated a juvenile plant. You're a natural. Give it a few years and you could work in maintenance with me. Is that an employment offer? It's a joke. Though honestly, the benefits are terrible. But the company's not bad once you get past the crushing existential dread of floating through space in a metal tube. They worked in comfortable silence for a while, the only sounds the gentle hum of air recyclers and the occasional drip of irrigation systems. Celestria proved surprisingly adept once she adjusted to the manual labor, and her ears had settled into a relaxed forward angle that the briefing materials said indicated contentment. On Aerith, she said eventually, we have forests that sing. The trees are networked telepathically with the species that tends them. They grow in patterns that reflect the emotional states of their caretakers. Beautiful, but there's no privacy. Every feeling becomes part of the landscape. That sounds amazing and horrifying in equal measure. It's why your concept of internal monologue fascinates us. You can think something without the entire world knowing it, until you accidentally broadcast it ship-wide at least. She glanced at him, and her mouth curved into what might have been a smirk. Tell me, do you often narrate your thoughts aloud? Only when I think I'm alone. It helps me process. I didn't realize that was weird until alien telepaths started analyzing it. It's not weird. It's human. That's what my people are trying to understand. You're all so separate from each other, carrying your thoughts in isolation, and yet you still manage to connect. To love, to build civilizations. She set down another transplanted seedling with growing confidence. We've never learned to be alone. The idea terrifies us. David paused, considering. Is that why the Council is so interested in this? In us? You're looking for people who can teach you how to be individuals, instead of just parts of a collective. Partially. The collective mind has kept us stable for millennia, but it's also made us stagnant. No one disagrees because everyone knows what everyone else is thinking. No one takes risks because the group consensus always trends toward safety. We're efficient, peaceful, and slowly dying of sameness. Her ears drooped. When I watch your human stories about people choosing each other despite impossible odds, defying logic for love or friendship, or just because they believe something matters, I feel something we don't have a word for. Longing, perhaps, for the ability to choose without knowing the outcome in advance. You're describing free will with extra steps. We have free will. We simply have perfect information about what everyone else will think of our choices before we make them. It rather takes the adventure out of living. David pulled off his gloves and sat on one of the stools, gesturing for her to join him. She did, mimicking his casual posture with careful attention. So when I said you'd make a good wife, what did your perfect information tell you about how people would react? Nothing. Your thoughts were private until you spoke them. We couldn't prepare, couldn't predict, couldn't achieve consensus on the proper response. It was chaos. She smiled, and it transformed her face from regal to radiant. It was wonderful. Most people don't describe me causing chaos as wonderful. Most people aren't desperate for unpredictability. She looked down at her hands, still covered in potting soil despite the gloves. The Council sees this as an opportunity for structured cultural exchange. They want to study how humans maintain individuality while forming bonds. They want to create protocols and frameworks. But you don't. I want to know what it feels like to make a choice that isn't filtered through 200 years of collective wisdom and telepathic consensus. I want to plant a seedling and not know if it will survive. I want to laugh at a joke and not have everyone else's reaction echoing in my mind telling me if it's appropriately funny. Her ears rotated forward, fixing on him with intense focus. I want to know who I am when I'm not connected to everyone else. And your accidental broadcast made me wonder if maybe a human could help me find out. The weight of her words settled between them like the gentle gravity that kept the ship oriented. David found himself acutely aware of how close she was sitting, how the grow lights made her skin seem to glow faintly, how her ears tracked his every movement with an attention that felt both alien and intimately familiar. That's a lot of pressure to put on a maintenance engineer who talks to himself, he said carefully. Is it? You've already shown me something my people rarely experience. This. She gestured at the hydroponics bay, the dirt under their nails, the simple act of growing things without telepathic integration. Doing something inefficient purely because it feels good. That's revolutionary to us. It's just gardening. Nothing is just anything when you've spent a century being perfect. She stood abruptly, moving to the observation window that looked out on the stars. David Torres, I need to tell you something. The Council has formally proposed what they're calling the Partnership Protocol. They want us to continue meeting. Structured interactions designed to model human-Earthian cooperation. They want to turn us into a cultural exchange program. They want to turn us into a symbol, the human and the queen, bridging two civilizations through authentic connection. There will be media coverage, educational materials, analysis of every interaction. Her reflection in the glass looked trapped. They've already scheduled our next meeting, a formal dinner with representatives from both sides, cameras, questions, performance. David joined her at the window, close enough that their reflections overlapped slightly. And you're telling me this because I'm asking if you want to refuse. If you want to tell them this was just a misunderstanding and return to your normal life. I would support that decision. I would understand it. But she turned to face him directly, and her ears angled in a position he didn't recognize from any briefing materials. Vulnerable, maybe. Hopeful. But if you're willing to continue this chaos, if you're willing to help me learn what it means to be someone beyond my crown, then I'm asking you to endure the symbol making with me. Not because the Council demands it, but because I want to know where this goes when neither of us can predict the ending. David looked at her, really looked, and saw past the elegant features and alien ears to the person underneath, who was just as lost and overwhelmed as he was. He thought about his invisible life before the intercom incident, the comfortable monotony of fixing things and staying unnoticed. He thought about her 200 years of perfect performance with no room for mistakes. Okay, he said, but on one condition. Name it. Every time they schedule one of their official cultural exchange performances, we also schedule something like this. Something real. No cameras, no analysis, just two people trying to figure out who they are when nobody's watching. Her ears lifted in unmistakable joy. You're negotiating with me. I fix things for a living. I'm pretty good at finding workable solutions to impossible problems. And you think we're a fixable problem. I think we're two people in an absurd situation who can either let it crush us, or we can decide to make something interesting out of it. He held out his hand, soil-stained glove and all. Partners in chaos. She looked at his hand, then carefully pulled off her own glove and clasped his bare hand with hers. Her skin was warmer than he expected, and her grip was firm. Partners in chaos, she agreed. Then softer, thank you for seeing me, David Torres. Thank you for laughing at my terrible jokes, Your Majesty. Celestria, when we're in the dirt together, just Celestria. Her communicator chose that moment to chime urgently. Her ears flattened in annoyance as she checked it. The Council requires my presence. Ambassador Wei is apparently having what they call concerns about our unauthorized meeting. Time to face the music. Is that another human idiom? It means time to deal with the consequences of our choices. She smiled, and it carried the weight of someone who just decided consequences were worth having. Then let's go make our choices matter. They left the hydroponics bay together, and if anyone noticed the dirt under their fingernails during the emergency diplomatic session that followed, they were too polite to mention it. But David caught Celestria's eye across the conference table when Ambassador Wei launched into her 17th point about proper protocols, and her ears tilted just slightly in shared amusement. It was, he decided, a promising start to their partnership in chaos. 3 months had transformed the observation deck where David's life had changed. It no longer served as a quiet maintenance access point, but had been converted into what Ambassador Wei diplomatically called the Integration Center, and what David and Celestria privately referred to as the fishbowl. Today, however, It was empty except for the two of them and the stars beyond the transparent walls. "They're calling it the accidental diplomacy model," Celestria said, scrolling through reports on her data tablet. Her ears tilted back in what David now recognized as exasperation. 17 universities want to study our interactions. Earth's Council on Xenocultural Relations has proposed funding for similar programs across the fleet. All because I couldn't keep my mouth shut. David was transplanting a small tomato plant into a decorative pot, part of the garden they'd been cultivating in the observation deck against several regulations. Captain Rodriguez had stopped trying to enforce those particular rules around week 2, all because you were honest at the right moment. She set down the tablet and moved to help him, her movements with the soil now practiced and confident. Though I suspect Ambassador Wei would phrase it as catastrophically poor timing that somehow yielded unprecedented diplomatic outcomes. She's still mad about the hydroponics incident. She stopped threatening to revoke your clearances, which constitutes forgiveness in diplomatic terms. Celestria tamped down the soil around the seedling with careful attention. This one will produce fruit in approximately 6 weeks, according to your agricultural database. Red tomatoes, specifically. I've become invested in their success. That's called caring about something. Welcome to having hobbies. Her laugh echoed off the transparent walls. Over the past months, that sound had become familiar aboard the asterisk Kepler's Promise asterisk. The crew no longer stopped conversations when she walked through common areas. Her guard detail had learned to tolerate David's terrible puns, and Celestria herself had started appearing in the mess hall during off hours, learning to appreciate what she called aggressively mediocre coffee, and what everyone else called the only thing keeping this ship functional. David's communicator buzzed. He glanced at it and groaned. "Lieutenant Park wants to know if the atmospheric sensors in Section 7 are malfunctioning or if I've been ignoring the maintenance schedule." "Have you been ignoring the maintenance schedule?" "I've been slightly distracted by unplanned cultural exchange duties." "Tell Park I'll provide official documentation that you've been assigned to diplomatic functions." She pulled out her own communicator, already composing the message. "Though perhaps we should establish boundaries. The Council's requests for our time have become excessive." That was an understatement. The past 3 months had been a whirlwind of formal dinners, structured interactions, media appearances, and what the Erythian delegation called observational bonding sessions, which mostly involved them doing normal activities while xenopsychologists took notes. They'd played chess while experts analyzed their decision-making processes. They'd cooked meals together while cultural anthropologists documented their collaborative patterns. They'd even been asked to argue about something to demonstrate conflict resolution, which had resulted in a heated debate about whether plant-based starship systems were superior to mechanical ones that had somehow become a viral sensation across both civilizations. Through it all, they'd maintained their private agreement. For every official function, they carved out time for something real. Midnight walks through the ship's corridors, shared meals in the hydroponics bay, long conversations about nothing and everything while the stars wheeled past, moments where they could forget about being symbols and just exist as two people figuring out friendship in the space between worlds. "David," Celestria said quietly, setting down her communicator, "the Council has made a proposal." Something in her tone made him look up sharply. Her ears were angled in a position he'd learned meant serious concern mixed with anticipation. "What kind of proposal?" "They want to formalize our arrangement, not as a diplomatic protocol, but as a genuine bond. They've observed our interactions and concluded that what we have is precisely what they'd hoped to find between our species. Trust built through authenticity rather than negotiation." She met his eyes, and he saw vulnerability there that even 3 months ago she would have hidden. They're suggesting a formal partnership ceremony, something that would be recognized by both our governments, as a legitimate union between representatives of our peoples. David's hands stilled in the soil. They want us to get married. In essence, yes. Though the Erithian term translates more closely to chosen bonding of significant intent. It would make you effectively a prince consort. You would have diplomatic status, security clearances, and responsibilities that would fundamentally alter your life. And you, what do you want? Her ears rotated through several positions before settling into something that looked like hope fighting with fear. I want to know if the person I've become over these past months can exist outside of structured diplomatic functions. I want to continue planting tomatoes and drinking terrible coffee and learning what it means to choose something for myself rather than for my people. She moved closer, close enough that he could see the faint bioluminescence in her skin, a stress response she'd learned to control except in moments of intense emotion. But I won't ask you to sacrifice your life for mine. You were happy in your invisibility before I disrupted it. Happy is a strong word. I was comfortable, safe, completely forgettable. David stood, brushing soil from his hands. You want to know what I've learned these past 3 months? Being seen is terrifying. Being part of something bigger than fixing atmospheric sensors is overwhelming. But being known by someone who actually understands what it's like to perform for everyone else while hiding who you really are. That's worth the terror. David, I'm not done. Here's the thing about your people's perfect information through telepathic consensus. You know what everyone thinks, but you don't get surprised. You don't get moments where someone looks at you and sees something you didn't know was there. He took her hands, feeling the warmth of her skin and the slight tremor that betrayed her nerves. You've taught me that being invisible was just another way of hiding. I don't want to hide anymore. So yes, I'll go through with whatever ceremony the council wants, but not because they're proposing it. Her ears perked up, attentive and hopeful. Then why? Because 3 months ago, you asked me to show you what normal looks like. And I've realized that normal is just 2 people choosing to keep showing up for each other despite the chaos. You've shown up for me, defended me to the council when they questioned whether a maintenance engineer was appropriate for diplomatic functions, learned to appreciate hydroponics bay dirt and my terrible sense of humor. You've let me see the person behind the crown, and that person is someone I want to keep knowing. That's not very romantic by human standards, she said, but her voice carried laughter underneath the words. Where's the passionate declaration, the dramatic moment? You've been watching too many of those romantic comedies. Real relationships are built on showing up and choosing each other repeatedly. That's the drama. That's what matters. He squeezed her hands gently. So here's my declaration. Celestria, I choose you. Not because the council suggested it or because our governments think we make a good political symbol. I choose you because you laugh at my jokes, because you take tomato cultivation seriously, because you're learning what it means to be yourself, and I want to be there while you figure it out. She was quiet for a long moment, her ears cycling through positions he couldn't quite interpret. Then she smiled, brilliant and genuine. On Aerith, we have a saying. The strongest bonds are forged in the space between knowing and choosing. I knew you would be important the moment you spoke those words on the observation deck, but I'm choosing you now, with full understanding of what that means. So that's a yes to whatever ceremonial chaos they're planning. That's a yes to partnership, to choosing each other despite the performance, to continuing this beautiful disaster we've created. She stepped closer, and her voice dropped to something intimate and certain. Make me yours, David Torres. Not because councils demand it or cameras watch us, but because you want to know who I am when the crown comes off and keep choosing that person anyway. He kissed her then, soft and certain, and somewhere in the security center alarms were probably going off about unauthorized intimate contact during diplomatic functions, but neither of them cared. When they pulled apart, her ears were angled in unmistakable joy, and her bioluminescence pulsed gently with contentment. We're going to have to tell Ambassador Wei, David said eventually. She'll have 17 forms for us to fill out. Captain Rodriguez will want incident reports. The council will demand ceremonial planning sessions. Media coverage across 2 civilizations. The endless analysis of our relationship dynamics. They looked at each other and started laughing, the sound echoing through the observation deck and out into the corridor where Celestria's guards were undoubtedly listening and absolutely not placing bets on the outcome. "Worth it?" she asked. David looked at the tomato plants they'd been tending, at the stars beyond the walls, at the woman who'd somehow become his partner in the beautiful chaos of first contact. He thought about the invisible maintenance engineer he'd been 3 months ago and the person he was becoming now, someone who chose to be seen, to matter, to build something real in the space between worlds. "Absolutely worth it," he said. And when they left the observation deck hand in hand to face the inevitable bureaucratic storm their decision would create, they did it together, laughing at the absurdity and wonder of 2 people from different worlds who'd found each other through an accidental broadcast and chosen to make it mean something. The universe, indifferent as always, spun on around them. But in one small corner of it, on a ship called Kepler's Promise 2 people had made a promise of their own, to keep showing up, to keep choosing, to keep finding the extraordinary in the simple act of being known. It was, they both agreed, the most human thing either of them had ever done.